underground cities, and tunnels. An underground city is a series of linked subterranean spaces that may provide a defensive refuge, a place for living, working, or shopping, a transit system, mausolea, wine or storage cellars, cisterns or drainage channels, or several of these. The term underground city also refers to a network of tunnels that connects buildings beneath street level that may house office blocks, shopping centers, metro stations, theaters, and other attractions. At approximately 2:20 p.m. on June 6, 1889, an accidentally overturned glue pot in a carpentry shop started the most destructive fire in the history of Seattle. After the Great Seattle Fire, new construction was required to be of masonry, and the town's streets were regraded 1 to 2 stories higher. Pioneer Square had originally been built mostly on filled-in tidelands and often flooded. The new street level also kept sewers draining into Elliott Bay from backing up at high tide. At first, pedestrians climbed ladders to go between street level and the sidewalks in front of the building entrances. Brick arches were constructed next to the road surface above the submerged sidewalks. Vault lights, a form of walk-on skylight with small panes of clear glass, which later became amethyst-colored, were installed over the gap from the raised street and the building, creating the area now called the Seattle Underground. Merchants and landlords knew that the ground floor would eventually be underground, and the next floor up would be the new ground floor, so there is very little decoration on the doors and windows of the original ground floor, but extensive decoration on the new ground floor. Once the new sidewalks were complete, building owners moved their businesses to the new ground floor, although merchants carried on business in the lowest floors of buildings that survived the fire, and pedestrians continued to use the underground sidewalks lit by the vault lights still seen on some streets, embedded in the grade-level vaulted sidewalk above. In 1907, the city condemned the underground for fear of bubonic plague, 2 years before the 1909 World Fair in Seattle, Alaska-Yukon Pacific Exposition. The basements were left to deteriorate or were used as storage. Some became illegal flophouses for the homeless, gambling halls, speakeasies, and opium dens. Only a small portion of the Seattle Underground has been restored and made safe and accessible to the public on guided tours. In 1965, local citizen Bill Speidel formally created Bill Speidel's Underground Tour, which continues to operate from the Pioneer Building and adjacent buildings. The tour route passes disused storefronts, artifacts, and multiple tunnel entrances. Underground cities are similar in nature to skyway systems and may include some buildings linked by skyways or above-ground corridors rather than underground. Some cities also have tunnels that have been abandoned. Seattle is not the only city with underground tunnels and cities. Almost every country has at least a few. Some other underground tunnels and cities in the United States include New York, California, Portland, Oregon, and even Washington, D.C. The old Portland Underground, better known locally as the Shanghai Tunnels, is a group of passages in Portland, Oregon, mainly underneath the Old Town Chinatown neighborhood and connecting to the main business section. The newspapers of the 19th century document tunnels and secret passages underground. Organized crime was the center of many of these stories. Historians have stated that although the tunnels exist and the practice of Shanghaiing was sometimes practiced in Portland, Shanghai is the practice of kidnapping people to serve as sailors by coercive techniques such as trickery, intimidation, or violence. In his book, The Oregon Shanghaiers, Portland historian Barney Blalock traces the notion that the tunnels were used to Shanghai sailors to a series of apocryphal stories that appeared in the newspaper The Oregonian in 1962, and the subsequent popularity of Shanghai tunnel tours that began in the 1970s. He says the tours were popular but misled visitors. Under Los Angeles, there is a labyrinth of tunnels stretching 11 miles under the city. These tunnels were first constructed in the Hill and Bunker Street areas at the beginning of the 1800s. The reason the tunnels were originally constructed was to ease the traffic that Los Angeles was experiencing. Unfortunately, at the rate that Los Angeles was growing, even the tunnels did not help with the gridlock. Streetcars were added to the public transportation offered in Los Angeles to encourage people not to drive their cars. Not wanting the tunnels to go to waste, a subway was constructed in the tunnels once meant for cars to drive through. The subway was opened for use in 1925, but when the underground transportation did not help the traffic in the city, officials decided that above-ground transportation was the better option. With the tunnels being abandoned for their transportation use, it was unclear what purpose they would serve. But when Prohibition rolled around, the abandoned tunnels served for a perfect backdrop to imbibe. Prohibition turned the Los Angeles tunnels into speakeasy bars. In 1920, the Volstead Act went into effect and alcohol was banned across the country. Unlike some cities that at least feigned they were enforcing prohibition and not allowing people to drink alcohol, Los Angeles was a city where prohibition was hard to enforce. This was especially true once the tunnels under the city became vacant, allowing for a perfect location for speakeasies to pop up. With specific areas of the tunnels not being used, such as Pacific Electric's tunnels, these larger tunnels were used to link smaller tunnels that would lead to the basements of hotels and bars in the downtown area. With this network, there were more speakeasies during Prohibition than there were bars before the Volstead Act was enacted. The tunnels were also used to move alcohol from Mexico and Canada into Los Angeles, akin to the tunnels under the Finger Lakes that were used for bootlegging purposes. With the help of the mob, alcohol flowed freely in Los Angeles from 1920 to 1934, when Prohibition was repealed. In the years after Prohibition, there were other uses for the tunnels. Those uses include moving high-profile criminals from the jail to the courthouse, moving money under the city and filming locations. While the tunnels are closed to the public, there are still areas in the city where they are accessible. This is because a portion of the tunnels are still used today by city employees to get from one building to another. Today, they have become graffiti-ridden and are dark and damp. But for those interested, these access points allow people to see some real history of Los Angeles, up close and personal, and imagine what life was like when tunnels were an integral part of Los Angeles.